Okay, so I'll start the introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I really appreciate your time and your enthusiasm and your efforts in order to learn something new today. I have with me Jocelyn Cooper, who is the Executive Director for the Mercer Council. I'm really excited to have her here, and she'll be talking about her program now, but I just wanted to introduce her before we get going.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so happy to see that some of you took your time today to join us. I was supposed to have a co-pilot today, Paige Hoagland from the Ewing High School. She is the SAC counselor, but as we know, the schools are very busy right now and sort of adapting to the virtual, environment and just dealing with whatever comes up. So I'm going to be flying solo today, but that's why I'm glad that I have all of you here with us too. We're going to be talking about empowering you and empowering, your confidence, and validating some of the challenges about talking to youth regarding substance related challenges and things like that. This is often a difficult area that a lot of people, just feel a little self-conscious or stressed about. And so hopefully this can provide some information, answer some questions, get your input and feedback, and we can go from there. I think as adults, and trying to assist youth and, just other community members, other adults in this area, one of the things we want to try not to do is make the conversation about drugs and alcohol a taboo. We want to be a face and a person, that youth feel comfortable coming to talk with us about these things. And so if you take anything away from this today, it's that, we want to try to make sure that we convey, that we are willing to sort of hear any and everything when it comes to this topic, and that we can be a trusted adult that can, sort of jump in and help provide support and gain access to resources. So here's sort of our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about brain science. We're going to talk about some consequences associated with substance use, but also some of the positives and the rewarding things that come from youth use. We're going to talk about risk and protective factors and how we can have an impact on those. We are going to try to talk about some signs and symptoms of alcohol and substance use, how to engage youth, how to raise awareness about different prevention methods that we have, how to be a good ally, how to be somebody who wants to reduce stigma and make a positive impact in this area. And also, we're going to leave you with a ton of resources, at the end. And Ruth does a great job of packaging these things and making them accessible later. So again, like I said, feel free to jump in. So one of the things that we know is that brain development continues until 25 plus, and that's critically important because any substance that's introduced to a developing brain and body is going to potentially change the structure of that brain. And so that's why we have laws in place. For example, it's illegal to use alcohol under 21 because we're trying to delay the onset of use so that that brain has a chance to fully develop. And those structural and chemical changes can have serious implications on learning, decision making, other things like that. And so substances really affect the brain in two ways. One, by imitating the brain's natural chemical messengers, so mimicking what's already there, or overstimulating or flooding the reward circuit of the brain. And so our brains are wired to repeat healthy activities. So for example, does anyone here love food and crave certain foods and love to eat? And that's because, we pair feeling good with things that we need to do so we can have nourishment for our bodies. And because often, at least initially, substances make us feel good, substances target the brain and the reward circuit the same way. And so what ends up happening over time is that our brains and bodies adjust to the surge of chemicals that are present in them, and they stop making them themselves. And so, that's why people have such a hard time, getting into recovery, because their brain is used to the substances that feel good, the dopamine being present for them. The brain has sort of turned the production process down on that, and it takes a little bit of time for that to be stimulated and start making its own again. And so people often feel depressed or flat, lifeless, lack interest in things that they once enjoyed. And, you know, they move very quickly from wanting to get high and feel good to needing to use to feel themselves, or, you know, just sort of feel kind of normal. I don't like to really use that word, but normal for them. Is there, Ruth, are you going to monitor the chat?
Yes.
Okay, because I saw something flashing.
Yeah, Brian said dark chocolate.
Oh, yeah, me too, definitely. And so the Monitoring the Future from the National Institute on Drug Abuse is a great place to go to get information about current drug trends, especially that are impacting our youth. They survey 8th graders, 10th graders, and 12th graders, so you can sort of stay up to date on the current trends that are impacting youth at any given time. This was published in 2020, but it was data from 2019. And again, you can go to the link and find all of the information. Some of the things that we're focused on in the trends are alcohol, vaping, and marijuana, which we know are popular for youth. And so, you know, many of us that are here understand sort of the consequences associated with substance use. You know, we know that it impacts development socially, emotionally, physically. A lot of times it can lead to different accidents and fatalities, strained relationships, you know, clinical, you know, mental health challenges, substance related challenges. We often think of people who use substances as having problems with the legal system, but we don't often think of substances making someone more vulnerable to be a victim of crime. We know that substance use can lead to poor judgment, memory-related problems, decision-making, increased risk-taking behavior, and things like that. But something that we don't often focus on, we often sort of tend to think of the consequences and sort of like the negatives, but we don't really often take time to think about what purpose you know, using substances is serving for someone. And we often think that it has to be associated with, you know, mood regulation or, you know, to reduce stress and things like that. But sometimes the answer is just that it feels good and it's fun and they just want to do it because they do. And I think, you know, we need to validate that as an acceptable answer, because when we fail to acknowledge sort of what someone's getting out of the substances, we're really invalidating their full experience, and we're not going to be able to make as much of an impact in working with them to reach their goals, or to, you know, reduce harm, or to, you know, improve substance related clinical presentations. Ruth, you can interrupt me at any time.
Okay.
Anything you want to add so far?
I actually, working with students, I found that being a prevention educator, you get these responses a lot, and I've always had trouble responding to them in a way that doesn't sound like I'm encouraging their substance use, but I also want to let them know that it's completely normal for them to feel this way. So I just, finding that language has always been difficult for me. And obviously, you know, there have been points where we faltered in the way that we have our word choices. But I think, especially when talking to youth with stuff like this, the word choice does matter too. And I think that's something that I've struggled with, but I think I'm getting better at as I continue to be a prevention educator.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody else wants to add, please feel free to take yourself off mute. But when dealing with these challenges, it is tough, right? Because there are potential risks associated with this. There are damages that can happen, but you know, there are ways for us to validate people's experiences and validate people's truths without sort of like supporting or acknowledging or encouraging substance use. You know, while this might be dangerous, I understand that you like to do it because it's fun. And so let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about both parts of that. What makes it fun? You know, we need to kind of hash that out. We need to be willing to sort of go there and not let our own sort of fears about how that's going to be perceived prevent us from talking about it. Anybody else before we keep going? Awesome. So here's some of the risk factors associated, you know, that may contribute to substance use. So early onset, the younger somebody first initiates the use of a substance, the more potential risk it has. If they have the perception that their family members, their peers, their community approve alcohol and drug use, that's something that increased risks. Hanging out with peers who, or community members or family members who engage in risky behaviors, early behavior challenges, risk taking, things like that. Another important one is low monitoring or perception of monitoring. If someone thinks, oh, I have this sort of free time that nobody's going to know what I'm doing. Family members' own substance use, or their perception of a family member, friend, use. If they have a low connection to school, and if it's not school, some other community resource or activity, that's definitely a risk. Having mental health challenges, either themselves or within their family, experiencing trauma at any point in the past. Accessibility and availability. We know, that the more access someone has, the easier it is to get, the more likely they're going to be to use. And also something that's really important, for example, in the case of marijuana, when people have the perception that the harm of using something is low, they are more likely to use it. And so when we talk about, I'm using air quotes here, when we talk about like marijuana being safe, marijuana being natural, marijuana being a medicine, now it being legal, that sort of creates this misconception that it is safe and there's no harm in using it, and because of that I may be more likely to use that substance. And so we have to be particularly careful, like Ruth said, like our language matters, the way that we help people perceive things matters. So some of the protective factors are linked to the risk factors. So age of onset, obviously, if we can prevent onset altogether, which is not always possible, or at least delay the age that somebody first has onset, that's a protective factor. If people think that others disapprove of their use or experimentation, that is protective. If people feel like they have adequate monitoring or perception of monitoring, if they're connected to school or a community resource or a sports team or a religious institution, those are all things that promote protection. If there's positive mental health, wellness, well-being, emotional intelligence, ability to sort of implement coping skills and self-regulate. But then again, those are all skills that we learn, right? Someone has to sort of help us with those. So that also means access to resources such as mental health help, medical care, things like that. If they have a high perception of harm. So for example, I was an anxious kid. And so when we had the DARE program, I know there's sort of some mixed research out there about
say no
of DARE. Yeah. And we know we're going to get to that later, but like I was a scared kid. So when DARE came in and, I saw the cop standing up in front of the room, like the perception of harm for me was high. So that did, work for me. But again, we know sort of across the board that DARE and other programs like it have been ineffective. Limited access or availability. So communities who have, policies and ordinances or less, establishments that sell different products. We know that that's protective. Strong relationships with community, with family, with a trusted adult, with a friend group that is a positive influence. And then certainly prevention and early intervention. So programs like Mercer Council, and early intervention services that could help if somebody has, already started to experiment or experience use. I saw Brian come off mute. Did you have something?
No, I always look at whenever there's a barrier to any type of service or any type of gaining access to resources, to look at those barriers and then try to identify them in order of precedence. Is there a high priority in, let's say, access to transportation? Am I immediately homeless? I look at those and say, okay, listen, if we're going to identify a priority, which one could we identify first? How do we address it and try to overcome that so you can move on to gaining those access to services and those resources that you need in order to get what you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we know that systems related to mental health and substance use are difficult to navigate. And so, that's another barrier. If I don't have somebody that might be able to help walk me through the process or be there, when, we're trying to gain access or figuring out things with insurance, it certainly is helpful to have someone that can help identify those barriers and, difficult access points. We are going to talk a little bit more about some of the systemic factors that contribute to substance use. We often think about like individual risk and protective factors, but there are so many systemic issues that also really come into play with this problem. So one of the things that we try to do in prevention, but also, you all can do this too, is to reduce the occurrence or the likelihood of risk factors and increase the likelihood of protective factors. So for example, if we know that somebody who is involved in early risk-taking behavior, if we know that that behavior is potentially a risk factor for substance use, one of the things that we can implement is teaching coping skills, teaching people how to self-regulate, teaching people how to just identify their feelings and convey them to, to other people. And then we can really work on the skills component of that. If we know that lack of supervision is a risk factor and someone has lack of supervision, we can, make policy or systems change to increase access to things that will monitor. So after school or extracurricular activities, different community programs that if a parent, has to work, or if a guardian or someone, that is involved in a child's life is not able to be present, during the hours after school, can we implement something that is there to help increase that and make that a protective factor? And so this is sort of where we get to the systemic inequities in sort of health and access to resources. So we know that systemic racism has sort of infiltrated, not infiltrated, it's sort of based on everything that was created. And so, there is inequities in the legal system, medical system, counseling, housing, all of it. And so because of those, systems, they create inequities. And I want to get to the idea of social determinants of health. So these are basically conditions in people's environment that, benefit or detriment their quality of life, their health, etc. So this examples of this would be safe housing, safe communities, racism in different systems or in a community or in a workplace. Access to education, job, finances, and the more challenges people have in these areas, the more inequities they may face. And so when we're thinking about, how this impacts substance use, communities who have been historically oppressed and marginalized experience systemic racism, trauma. They have not been given the same access to financial resources, mental health resources, physical health care. And as a result of that, they have more risk factors that are, that make them unfortunately more likely to wind up with a mental health related challenge or a substance use disorder. And then it is cyclical because those conditions and factors and systemic issues have increased the likelihood that they will have potentially a substance use disorder. And then those same things prevent them from getting the support with the substance use disorder. So unfortunately, it's sort of a vicious cycle. And unless we sort of take a zoomed out approach and look at this on a systemic level, we are going to continue to have a lot of these challenges. There's too many people and the problem is too pervasive to continue to just try to pull individuals out. And sometimes it feels like we're not necessarily doing a great job with that. We're trying and we're learning and, we're working to become more evidence-based, but these are definitely things to consider, and policy and zoomed out approaches, environmental strategies will help this. And so that's obviously a big thing. And that's why, public health and prevention are so important, especially when we're focusing on sort of primary universal prevention and environmental strategies, and, the prevention metaphor, which there is a link here. And if Ruth shares this, you'll be able to see the link. But, if we're down the river and we see, youth sort of drowning and coming by, we can't pull everyone out. We need to go to see why they're falling in the first place. We're not going to be able to treat our way out, arrest our way out. We can't tell people to just say no. We can't scare them into not getting involved with substances. It's not effective. We know the war on drugs has been ineffective, and it has just perpetuated social and racial injustices. The drug war is rooted in sort of racism and oppressive and harmful practices. We know that prevention should be evidence-based, and we have a lot of these programs that are evidence-based, that we have the ability to often facilitate in the community for free.
So just a quick thing, just before we move on. If anybody is wondering about how to this sounds a lot like adverse childhood experiences, right? So obviously, I think that ACEs comes in many different forms. And if anybody's wondering about that, I have 3 videos that touch upon ACEs. But while we're looking at that, I think that something important to point out is prevention is the best way to prevent something, obviously, is the best way to mitigate a substance use disorder, but also understanding that at any point of mitigation, it's still possible. That ACEs, even if you've gone through something traumatic from the ages 6 to 10, you still have time. Everyone is salvageable at any point of their substance use disorder and at any point of their trauma. And I think that prevention is obviously one point, and we intersect at every point.
Yeah, absolutely. Substance use exists on a continuum, and so do solutions, like all the way from, prevention, trying to prevent people from starting in the first place, but all the way to harm reduction, which we know is a critical strategy that we need to implement, if we are to combat and make strides in reducing, the devastation caused by substance related challenges. So we will talk about that. And I think, in prevention, in treatment, in just like medical health, we're doing more and learning more to try to meet people where they are instead of just prescribing sort of a one size fits all, which means that we need to listen. We need to invite people in. We need to believe that people are, the experts sort of their own experience, that they have the autonomy to sort of, guide their path. And we need to, sometimes I feel like as professionals, we think that we are the authority and, we can fix this, but, clients are really have the power and the skills, to guide themselves. And we are there to sort of support them. And that requires us to sort of listen, and help guide and connect to different experiences that may be positive in their life. So again, we talked about understanding sort of the why so that we can, help find solutions. But there are a number of reasons, all the way from wanting to have fun to, peer pressure, trying to fit in, just being curious, trying something, improving performance, to maybe help feel a little more social or a little less shy in certain situations, to, reduce worry or stress. So there are a lot of reasons. These you can see, you can kind of pause on in the recording. These are just some signs and symptoms based on the substances, and it's sort of like a 2-page chart. I'm not going to spend too much time there, but when we are talking about general signs and symptoms, one of the most important things I think to understand is that it's very difficult to sort of run down a list of what someone might look like who is experiencing a substance use disorder, because we're all individuals. None of us exist in a vacuum. We all have our own stuff. So, something that might be presenting in one individual, might be because of something else, not because of substances. But, yourself and your loved ones. And, these are just starting points to help guide your decision-making process. So anywhere from behavior changes, mood changes, friend groups or peer groups that are changing, trouble fulfilling responsibilities, having financial difficulties. There really are a wide range of things. But, again, these give you a starting point to say, I might want to look a little bit more into this. There's different physical symptoms that someone can exhibit, and it can't hurt to ask, right? In a caring way. I noticed that you're sleeping a little bit more than usual. I'm concerned about that. You usually, are up early in the morning and, do this, and this throughout the day. And I noticed that it's been tough for you to get out of bed. And I think the point here is that if we're noticing any change that is a concern to us, whether it's substances or not, that person might need support, whether it be for a mental health challenge or whatever it is. And so as a concerned, caring loved one, it can never hurt to really check in on that. I love you. I want you to be okay. Can we talk a little bit about this? Anybody have anything they want to add before I keep going? I feel like I'm rambling.
You're doing great.
Something else to just address quickly is signs of overdose. And so one of the particularly concerning things right now is that we are seeing people overdose from substances that you don't typically overdose from. And it's because of the widespread and pervasive presence of fentanyl and other synthetic substances that are finding their way into, for example, marijuana. We know that has happened. And so it is important to just understand what an overdose looks like so that you can intervene on that. So some of the signs and symptoms are like bluish, clammy, pale skin, lips, nails, difficulty breathing, not responsive, really small pupils. There are some gurgling sounds that happen with that. You can do a sternal rub, which is like pressing down right here. And if the person doesn't rouse, you need to call 911 in those situations. I think something that is great is that there is sort of a wider spread access to Narcan, which is a life-saving opioid overdose antidote. And so anyone can get trained in that. You can contact us and we can give you access to available trainings, but anyone can get trained, anyone can carry Narcan, anyone can administer. And as one of our team members, Melissa, always says, I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And so it's safe. It's if you suspect someone is having an overdose and they're not, but you give them the nasal spray of Narcan, there's very little negative effect that could happen. And obviously, when you call 911, you can respond by providing life-saving breathing, and CPR until the authorities get there, EMS, first responders. And I think another important thing to know is that because of the Good Samaritan Act, people should call 911 without fear of getting into a legal situation, because the idea here is that we want to preserve and save life. And so we have heard historically in the past of people not calling 911 when someone's been in a dire situation because of fear of potential consequences. There's a great exhibit that is, I think, now virtual during the pandemic. It's called Hidden in Plain Sight. There's sort of like an interactive website that you can go to that gives you sort of like a standard looking youth room. And you can click and play around and look in certain areas to sort of find what you may think is just a benign looking object or something that's in a child's room that really might be associated with substances or, paraphernalia, etc. So I would highly recommend that. It's called Hidden in Plain Sight. And, there is a facilitator that does come out to do it in person. They set up a whole exhibit, but I'm not sure how that looks, right now during the pandemic. But as you can see here, pop out little cubbies in certain things like Pringle cans, or I know some of them are soda cans. As you can see here, this looks like a hairbrush that the middle comes out so that you can put something in there. Even with the various vaping devices, and I wish our team member Melissa was here today, some of them, you look at them and they look like some of the little like metal wallets that are used to hold credit cards or, a flash drive. And a lot of these things are changing and becoming more refined as time goes on. And so it is tough if you're not actively, keeping up to know what things look like, or what you're looking for if you are concerned.
And also to know what the latest drug trends are. But in case you were all like curious about like vaping and what that looks like, I have 2 videos on it. So I will also put that down in the resources list below. Hattie was actually there for one of them. And we learned a lot of things along the way. So it was a really good program.
I see the chat lighting up, and I think someone might have
Yeah, Shakita, you raised your hand.
Yeah, you can just jump off mute. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, hello everyone. I just wanted to piggyback and just say how things are concealed so easily. Like they even have hoodies that have vapes in them nowadays. So it's really, they're hiding them or masking them really, really well. And I found that out, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. So I can only imagine how much more sophisticated it gets now.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, Shakita is one of our team members in Ewing High School, and we know that in high schools just generally and in middle schools, these vape devices are being used to conceal the use of vape products, marijuana, things like that, which all have, their own risks associated with that as well. And we do have training programs specifically related to vaping, and you can always reach out to us if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that.
Brian also put in the chat just quickly, Vape Watch, and Melissa Arnold, she's basically our vaping specialist, and she does a presentation where she's doing presentation with parents, and she's wearing a watch the whole time, and no one really knows. No one really knows, but all of a sudden she's like, what would you say if you found out I was wearing a vape right now? And then she shows them, and it's just a fully functioning watch with a vape inside. So it's amazing. Amazing in the most dire sense, but it's definitely amazing.
And it looks just like, like a less fancy, like smartwatch, it just looks like a basic like Fitbit type thing. And so when we have the resources and the information and the education, we feel empowered to then know what we're looking for and know, what to do about it. And so this is something that I think is really interesting. So what percentage do you think fills in the blank here? Youth who learn about the risk of substances from their parents or guardians are blank less likely to use substances. And you can just yell it out if you want. Heidi, I think you're mouthing 50%.
I was mouthing it, and then I thought, oh, I'll just unmute 50%.
Yeah, 50%.
Wow.
And so that's such a simple, it's not simple, meaning it's difficult to have these conversations and things like that. But if that's, one of the only things that we do as a trusted adult in someone's life is to give factual, information about the risks of substances and to let someone know we're here. If you're thinking about this, if you're worried about this, we are someone you can talk to. That's a pretty good statistic. And so the whole point of this presentation is to empower folks and adults to know, like if I am educated in this area and if I'm prepared, I can really affect change, with my youth. And that's whether you're a teacher or, whether it doesn't really matter who you are. If you work with youth, you can be that person for someone. And so just some more things to empower you. Don't shy away from sort of being the tough one. I know this is sometimes difficult, especially in today's world. Connect with youth, connect with, if you're a parent, connect with your child's friends, make connections with families in your community, other community members. Try to engage in and promote, sort of healthy activities that support emotional, well-being, emotional and social development. Get as much education as you can. Like it's cliche, but knowledge is power. Be a role model, set a positive example, sort of know where your kids, the youth that you're, involved with, where they are, what their activities are. Monitor your own home. So know, what's in the home, how easy it is to get access to that, keep tabs on that. If you take medications, or, if you have alcohol and young children, lock that away, try to make it more inaccessible, and then just seek help and support if needed. There is a quote here about parents being the role models for children, but as an adult, we sort of all have that responsibility, whether we're a community member, whether we're a teacher, an educator, a counselor, a religious leader, a neighbor, a coach, whoever it is, we are sort of consciously and unconsciously impacting and affecting youth's growth and development. They're hearing us, they're seeing us, they're modeling us, they're using us as sort of the bar that, the standards are set for. And, it's tough, but there are loving and caring ways to set boundaries and enforce consequences with the idea of care and concern and validation and, positive regard, and without, dehumanizing someone or pathologizing them or, criminalizing them. Anyone want to jump in before we keep going? I think we're doing good on time, and hopefully we'll have a lot of questions at the end.
12:41.
Yep, here's just some research that shows the effectiveness of sit-down family dinners. Again, when we're thinking of sort of solutions, sometimes, these things feel so overwhelming that we don't know how we'll, get ourselves out, or what can we do to adequately, prevent and things like that. But, and today it's tough to do sit down family dinners, but people who had sit down dinners with their family had less substance related challenges. And you can see some of the findings from the study here. I'm sorry, these are flying in one by one, but research consistently shows that those who eat dinner with families are less likely to use substances. In the study, there were two groups: those who had less than 2 family dinners, and those who had five or more. And those who ate 2 or less were 3 times more likely to try cannabis. That should say, we're definitely changing the language here. This is a little bit outdated. 2.5 more times likely to use cigarettes, and 1.5 times more likely to drink alcohol. And, not only the impact that it has on just the substance use, but it also helps connect people, and promotes support, and that someone's there for them, and that we're all sort of coming together and have a space to talk about things. So there were other positive things associated with it too: lower levels of family tension, youth who said that their parents are proud of them and engaged in their life, that they can confide in those adults about anything. And so, this is one solution that you can do. And again, if you're a family that works a second job, or has, a non-traditional shift, this is a little bit tough. And maybe the goal is not 5 or more, but let's just shoot for maybe 1 if it's not something that we do, just to have that space together. Some other things that we talked about is, we can sort of project certain things onto people. So how we handle things when we're approached about a certain topic that we maybe don't feel comfortable about, or that we're scared about, or that we might get angry about, we can sort of convey that to someone in a way that may impact their willingness to come to us about that thing. And so, for example, if I have a loved one who, comes to me, and it's completely understandable that I would be afraid, I would be anxious, I would be, but what I need to do is I need to think the way I respond to this person may, change the trajectory of how likely they are to come to me. And so I need to just take a deep breath and sit with my fear for a second. I can validate that. It's all completely reasonable that I would be feeling those things. But I need to remember that this is a person that I love and care about, and that they have trusted me with sort of this information, and they have come to me, and that's an honor. And so, trying to manage those reactions and consistently show up for someone, and be just someone who's going to be there no matter sort of what happens. Some other tips that I think are helpful for adults that, may be able to be in car rides to sports games or to school is, when we're shoulder to shoulder, that's a less threatening or, intimidating direct conversation. It may feel a little better to have those conversations when you're sitting side by side, or in the car. There's other things going on. Some other tips might be, trying to talk about things over a board game or, over a video game, or when we're engaged in some other activity, throwing a baseball, or, kicking a soccer ball, whatever it might be, planting flowers in a garden, whatever, doing chores, because it's less focused and hyper focused on sort of like the intensity of a serious conversation. There's also a link here for tips for every age, and this really breaks it down of how you can work with youth of varying ages to prevent substance use. Anyone else who is a parent or somebody who works with youth that want to just sort of call out a tip that they have or something that they do with their kids before we move on?
I know for me, Heidi, would you like to go? I bake with my nieces all the time. It's like one of our best activities, and the flour gets everywhere and the cake never really tastes that good, but it's enough for us to be like, all right, this is good, and those are when actually we have our best conversations. That's when they speak to me about the hard things. And I think that's important, that you don't have a hyper focus, that there's something else sort of taking the pressure off, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great example. Heidi?
Yeah, when I'm speaking with parents, a lot of times what I say is listen to your children. And what I mean by that is so many times we're, firing things at our kids like, get your soccer cleats. We got to go here. We got to go there. We got to do this. We got to do that. And then the kids want to talk to you about something important, but we tend to shut them down because we don't have time to listen to them. So my feeling is if you can't, find that time to listen to your child, even about the small things, they're not going to come to you with the bigger things. So that's what I like to share with parents.
Yeah,
So
that's
listen to your kids as much as they might go want, and you're not interested, just listen.
It's so important, and I'm so glad that you brought that up too, because we often, I think, youth internalize messages about their value or their ability to contribute, or their knowledge or expertise in certain areas. And I think as adults too, when we do get worried about these things, we put a lot of pressure on our performance, like what we're going to say or how we're going to fix it. And a lot of times, sometimes what we need to do is just listen, right? Listen and validate. Oh, that must have been really scary, or you must have been really uncomfortable in that situation. Sometimes just creating the safety of a space to allow for expression of whatever it is the best thing, the best gift that we can give at that time. So listening, don't ever underestimate the power of listening.
Oh, Shakita unmuted. Yeah, Shakita.
I was just gonna say, piggyback off your slide, that I do with my niece while I'm cleaning. Also, I try to do arts and craft, but the one thing that I didn't realize I did that has been really helpful, just doing everyday things. Like the last time it happened, I was showing her pictures of my trip. And I was like, you can come with me when you're older and things. And the conversation just progressed, and I began to plug in different things just to prepare and help her understand how, everything's a cause and effect. So if you don't get good grades, you can't do this or won't be able to do that. And, I plug in about substance abuse and things like that. So I guess off life experience, just having regular conversations with them. And then when you have the opportunity to plug in, that's also helpful, because it's almost like they look up to you. They want to experience some of these things that you're experiencing or talking about. And I feel like, I have their attention. Something sparked their interest. So let me plug in whatever I can at that moment, so they know if I want to do this or be able to do this, I have to do X, Y, and Z, or I shouldn't do X, Y, and Z, because that will stipend me doing whatever I want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not just listening, like you said, plugging in different things. We're not just listening for these things that are directly related to substances. We're also listening for other things. As we know, there's a lot of intersection between a lot of different things that go on with youth. And, another thing, just connecting back to what Shakita and what Heidi said, is we often think of ourselves as the one to sort of like convey knowledge or, give something, but we can also get a lot out of listening. We can also learn a lot from youth when we listen. And sometimes, again, we're so focused on imparting things on others that we forget, just some of the more simple skills that we can use, like listening and learning. So thanks for the feedback from those of you who added. Anyone else before we keep going? Awesome. And so just some tips for having a conversation about substances or about other just tricky or difficult things. If there are multiple adults involved in trying to have that conversation, sort of make sure you have a game plan, make sure that you're on the same page. And it's helpful, I think, to process your own emotions associated with the conversation or whatever the topic it is ahead of time, just so those aren't coming out, sort of in real time. Have as much information as you can, have resources ready to go. Obviously try to have conversations when people are not under the influence, because again, there's something altering sort of, their mind at the time. And something else that's helpful is to have a conversation after there has been a consequence. So, for example, if your youth comes home and, hits the mailbox and, comes in and whatever, the next morning might be a good time to say, I noticed that, this, and this happened. That's unlike you. I'm concerned about that. Let's go out and look at the car. Can you walk me through what's going on? I'm really worried about you. I want to make sure that you're okay. Let's have a conversation about this. So when we attach it to like actual events that have happened, sometimes that's helpful. Someone once used the example too, if a parent is passed out on the floor and their kids have to go to bed and they're, having to step over them. Like, it really scared us last night to see you like that. We're worried about you. The girls were upset. They thought, something had happened to you. We love you. And, we want to make sure that you're okay. Using iMessages is so helpful. It sounds like such an easy and simple thing, but when we take ownership of our own thoughts and feelings and put ourselves in control of how we are feeling and not point the finger and say, you did this and you did that, this is really helpful in starting a conversation and just creating an environment that feels free of blame. So I feel really scared when I see you come home like this. I worry that, I'm not going to have you around, or I worry that something bad is going to happen to you. Share facts of alcohol and drug use. And again, it's important that we not get too wrapped up in sort of the scare tactics or, the worst case scenarios. So for example, if we're saying like, oh, everyone who uses cannabis, will get into an accident or something like that. All someone needs is one example of someone who didn't get into an accident, and what you've said is already, there's no meaning behind it. There's nothing, there to sort of stick. Again, explore root causes, remain calm, and supportive and listening, even if no matter what happens, anger happens, defensiveness happens. Keep the focus on the child, the behavior, etc. Convey love and support, express concern, set realistic goals, boundaries, consequences, listen, and then establish clear rules that make sense for your own household, family situation. If you're not sure what those should be, seek guidance. Talk to someone at your youth school. There are SAC counselors, guidance counselors. There are just community mental health counselors or behavioral health counselors that you can consult about those things. Your primary care doctor, if you are privileged enough to have one of those and have access to those services, can be great starting points. there are great organizations like the Mercer Council and other nonprofits who help connect people who don't unfortunately have access to as many resources. So for example, Brian's here from our opioid overdose recovery program. That's regardless of your insurance status, that you can seek support for challenges related to opioids, and have various systems, have support, navigating various systems. So there are a lot of effective treatments and resources out there. I think, the most important thing, again, to understand about this is that the best we can do is to meet people where they are, not where we think they should be, not where we want them to be, where they are. And so that may mean that they're not ready to seek treatment, or they're not ready to talk about recovery. And so, okay, so can we take a harm reduction approach? I'm concerned about your medical health when you're, sharing needles. Is there something that we can do to keep you a little bit safer in that way? Or, are there, strategies that we can teach you of how to, and, I know that this is difficult to discuss for some people, but of how to actually shoot up so that you reduce the risk of, serious medical complications. So using, clean syringes, having access to sterile, water, just having things to clean yourself with. And, a lot of times at harm reduction sites, there are several of them in New Jersey, those places are access points for people when they are ready to maybe do something differently, that they can initiate services that way. And so every time we as an organization, or we as a person, have contact with someone about these matters, it is an opportunity, and it is a chance that something may happen differently. And so the more access points we can give people, the more likely we are to affect change and intervene when someone is ready. But there are a variety of treatments, all the way from, traditional withdrawal management, or what was formerly detox, inpatient long-term facilities. Now they have medication-assisted treatment. There are so many different things. And, if treatment's not for you, there are different recovery support options. Again, there are different medication options. 211 or Reach NJ is a great resource. Your county is a great place to start. The internet is a great place to start. You just have to, make sure that you are taking into consideration your insurance. If you have insurance, calling the back of your insurance card is often a great place to start. If not, calling, NJ Reach or the New Jersey Addiction Services Hotline are good places to start, because they'll be able to provide some resources that may assist you, and take into consideration all of your individual circumstances. You can always call us at Mercer Council if you don't have a starting point, or you want some support, or to be pointed in a direction. We're happy to work with you and talk to you. This is probably something that is the most important to me, at least, and I think this is a way that each of us have the ability to affect change and portray allyship, right? So I aspire to be an ally. I don't know that I'm the person that gets to decide whether I am or not, but I can show that I am trying to show up as an ally by just making small shifts, even in language, right? So we know that some of this language to the one side of the screen, addict, junkie, these are dehumanizing words. This is language that sort of reduces somebody to something that they are experiencing, that we know is a brain disease, and that we know has very complicated causes and very complicated solutions. Something that we can do is be sensitive by, conveying language that gives people autonomy, that recognizes their humanity, that recognizes that they are a person first, and that they have the right to care and compassion and services. And so when we talk about person first language, it means that they are first who they are, their being. So someone with a substance use disorder, someone with complicated relationships with substances, someone who is in recovery. We try to avoid language that, again, dehumanizes people. And I think when we can have sensitive language, we are showing people, I'm here for you, I'm here with you, I'm here to support you, and this is a safe topic for us to talk about. I recognize your personhood, and you have value and meaning. And last but not least, here are a lot of available resources. And I know Ruth said that she was going to make these all accessible for everyone in attendance today and anyone who might view this at another time. And this is just something important to know. There are a lot of pro-drug sites out there. Even on YouTube, there are people reviewing various products like vaping products or various substances. And it is important that we start talking about these things as professionals, as parents, with credible information, credible resources first, because, youth are learning about these things from sort of, inaccurate or unreliable sources, or just flat out wrong sources, from the internet. And so it's really important that we get in early and set the tone of the messages that we want to send, because there's a lot of stuff out there, and all you have to do is have access to a computer or a phone to be able to reach it. So it's the younger we start and the more consistent we are, the better off we are. That's my information. I know Paige couldn't be here today. She's over at the high school. If you're a Ewing High School youth, you can certainly contact her, but I am reachable by email, or at this time, better accessible by cell phone. And I hope to hear from you. I thank you all for joining us today and, spending your time here, and we can answer questions or, just have a discussion, whatever's best for everyone.
So I do want to respect everyone's time. So anyone that is unable to stay, you're more than welcome to leave. It's totally fine. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your effort and your attention. If anybody has any questions, we can check the chat. I don't see anything. Oh, Heidi just said, would not have expected sober and clean are not good expressions, which I find interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I think, again, the point here is not to beat anyone up for anything that they've said. I think the point is that we did use language before that we thought was acceptable, and it's okay that we know different now and we can use different things. And so when we think about like clean, for example, the opposite of that is dirty. And so it may be very subtle, but what message does that send to someone who we are calling clean, or when we're calling a urine dirty, or, something like that? It has implications that I think we internalize in very subtle ways. And we know that language is sort of the first step of dehumanizing people. And so, the point is not to feel guilty or ashamed. It's just, oh, okay, now, I've learned something different, and now, I can work as hard as I can to adopt that language and try to use it consistently. And I think the other thing is sometimes we're going to make mistakes, and if we catch ourselves and sort of apologize in real time, like, oh, that's not what I meant to say, or this is why I try not to use that, or I'm sorry, I said this, but that's not what I wanted to convey. Just being willing to sort of be vulnerable in those places and have that communication in real time. But that, I don't think a lot of people know that, Heidi. I don't think it's just you.
I think it's more that I've heard people who are clean and sober say that they're clean. I've been clean for X number of years. I've been sober for X number of years. So that's where I thought it was kind of odd, because I've heard people say that about themselves. So I guess, what would you recommend that we would say in a conversation? Like, I'm assuming obviously everyone is always in recovery. So, I mean, what would a term be, I guess, is what I'm saying. I mean,
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the important part here is that people have the autonomy to define themselves and the words that they want to use. And so I'm not challenging somebody who defines themselves that way to not say that. I'm just reflecting my language to convey the message that I am being sensitive and inclusive, and maybe that comes to a conversation like, I understand that you call it this. I'm going to call it this, if that's okay with you. Or would you like me to refer to it as that? This is sort of why I don't say that. just as somebody who's not part of this community, or, you know, whatever it might be. But we also want to make sure that we're validating people's experiences and allowing them to sort of define themselves in those situations, or, you know, use the language for those things. And it might be checking in, like, how would you prefer we have a conversation about this? What language would you like me to use?
I think that's a good way to approach it, like with any sort of community in general. And obviously, we don't want to be reductionist, so we want to give them as much autonomy over those labels as possible. So that's a really good point as well. If anybody, I don't see anything else in the chat, but anybody else have any questions? I don't think so.
Thank you
Yeah,
all
everyone says
so
thank you, you did very well, thank you. So
Thanks
thank you again for being here. Oh yeah, thank you, Heidi. And next week we will be talking with Brian Biddings and David DeCamp. They both work at the opioid overdose recovery program at the Mercer Council, and they will be talking about the recovery experience. So we really hope to see you next week. It's going to be a good one. So thank you for being here.